It doesn't seem to be an inquiry into what's real. It seems to be an almost. I mean, Jordan Peterson calls them the activist disciplines, and I can completely see why he terms them that way, because they seem to want to reach a desired end goal rather than to honestly inquire into the subject.
I really think they're having a terrible effect on society, a horrifying effect on men. I think they're interfering with scientific progress. As an evolutionary psychologist, I've faced for 25 years the sort of gender feminist view that, well, maybe evolution worked, but it only worked sort of up to the neck, and from the neck upwards,
Right.
the sexes are basically blank slates with regard to everything that is socially or economically, or sexually important. And I think that's just ludicrous and delusional because that's not the way it works in any other species. Sexual selection theory, which is what I use in a lot of my work, first developed by Darwin and updated and worked on and developed and empirically tested, is one of the most powerful theories we have in science. And it doesn't predict sex differences everywhere. It does predict sex differences any time that the two sexes faced different problems prehistorically, faced different selection pressures. Now, when it comes to certain things like, breathing or speaking or lots of kinds of thinking, cognition, memory, you don't expect big sex differences. You expect the sexes to be pretty similar in terms of being able to learn a language, being able to think about social problems. But sort of around the margins, you do expect pretty big sex differences in a lot of things where prehistoric males and females did different things and where the survival benefits and reproductive benefits were different for them. And I don't see how you can get around that. We know, there are chromosomal differences, genetic differences, hormonal differences, neurophysiological differences. And to believe that those don't matter in modern life is driven, it's a view that is honestly driven entirely by ideology. There's
Oh,
no good scientific theory that would predict, zero sex differences.
I'm really glad you put it that way because I was about to interject that myself. It does entirely seem to be gender ideology that's driving this, and it seems that they have the goal in mind and they need to construct a path to reach that goal, regardless of whether it reflects reality or not. They need to believe that men and women are exactly the same and will end up exactly the same, and the only way to account for the differential is through bigotry or prejudice. And I just don't think that's true. I,
Yeah, well, so I grew up with a mother who was kind of a social justice activist, who was in League of Women Voters and advocated for women's, voting and the right to choose and all of that. But she was what Christina Hoff Sommers would call a classical liberal feminist. She wanted political equality. She didn't believe in the blank slate. She didn't want special treatment. She didn't want affirmative action. And that's how I grew up, and I still think that's a very reasonable view. Whenever you see true injustice that's based on legal discrimination, whenever you see social norms that are actually genuinely sexist or dismissive of women, we need to fix that and we need to work on that.
sure.
And that's all totally valid. But when you have this view that you expect equality of outcome in every domain of work and life and leisure and sexuality, that's really harmful to both sexes because it kind of invalidates all of their quirks. Like it means women who actually do kind of want to stay at home and raise kids, or women who want to go into nursing because they really love taking care of people, can be made to feel kind of bad about themselves by the gender feminists for expressing what might be, pretty innate preferences about people over things. And conversely, the gender feminists try to make men feel terrible about all of our masculine, weird interests that women don't understand, where men tend to be more interested in them than women. Like, reading military history is just crazy masculinist oppressive stuff, whereas reading, the history of women's suffrage is completely wonderful and laudable. So I think those kind of double standards are really harmful to everybody.
I totally agree. I mean, I remember when I started looking into this, some of the first things I found were studies that were done on non-human primates, like chimps and bonobos, where they would essentially introduce an object into the environment, a doll or a toy truck or something like that, and they would find overwhelmingly that the male chimps would be interested in the mechanical object that they'd been given, whereas the female chimps would pick up the doll and care for it as if it was a baby. And this seems to be something consistent that's found within studies. And as a father of a young son myself, I can see this being replicated in his own behavior. He is fascinated with anything technological, anything mechanical. He has absolutely no interest in dolls or anything like that. And it's not that my wife hasn't tried to give him the option either. It's just that he just likes things. And I mean, why do they just outright dismiss these studies? Do they deny they exist? Do they have a counter argument to any of this? I mean, what do they say?
So I'm actually reviewing a Psychology of Women textbook at the moment, and it's very interesting how these studies are treated in the kind of materials that are presented in women's studies courses. So the tactic seems to be a combination of picking holes in the weakest possible empirical studies, right? So you don't take all of evolutionary psychology. You take like the 5% that is the flakiest and sounds the flakiest, and you critique that, and then you generalize that as if it's representative of the field. You also question the ideological motivations of the researchers, which is basically ad hominem. You point out kind of slightly embarrassing historical association. So you do guilt by association. You say, this is the same kind of thing that this or that person a century ago, wanted to research, and he had this or that racist, sexist view, and so therefore anybody who does the same kind of work or research or reaches the same conclusions must be the same kind of person. Those seem to be the three kind of tactics that are most common. And none of them, are really scientifically valid, but they are effective. They're effective rhetorically, and they do convince many young people that even mentioning biological sex differences will make you sound dumb and reactionary and will get you socially ostracized.